other things that can be even worse than quagga and zebra and golden mussels. Some of these are human disease organisms, which ballast water can and has in some cases spread around the world.
Welcome to Angler's Insight, where we dive deep into the issues that matter to anglers, boaters, and everyone who loves our waters. I'm your host, Mark Dietrich. In just a few moments, we will be joined by Dr. Andrew Cohen, a nationally recognized expert on aquatic invasive species. He currently directs the Center for Research on Aquatic Bioinvasions and previously led the Bioinvasions program at the San Francisco Estuary Institute. Dr. Cohen has dedicated his life to researching aquatic invasive species and protecting the health of our waterways. Today, we're talking about quagga, zebra, and golden mussels, what they are, how they got here, and what they can mean for the future of our waterways. Dr. Cohen, welcome.
Hello.
So for everyone that doesn't know, I messed up our first interview and Dr. Cohen was nice enough to come back on. So we are going to redo this and hopefully get the information out to everybody.
Yeah, this one will be perfect.
So let's start with some foundation. That's what you did last time, right? So we'll start with, what are these mussels?
So just to make sure we get some terminology straight. So in marine waters, we have different types of bivalves that we call clams and oysters and mussels and scallops and so on. And mussels are a type that has a particular shape, narrow at one end, wider at the other. They don't live buried in the sediment like clams do, and they're not cemented to a surface like oysters are, but rather they attach to hard surfaces with these protein threads called byssal threads. And they live at least partly out of the muck, out of the sediment, so that they have very short, basically what we call siphons or little hoses that pull water in and they filter food out of it and then extrude the filtered water out. And so because these are so short, they can't be buried in the sediment. They don't have these tubes that can extend up to the surface. So they live at least with the tube end of the shell, that is the wide end of the shell, exposed to the water. So those are mussels in marine systems. In freshwater, for some reason, we call everything clams and mussels. We call them all mussels when they're in freshwater. But what we're talking about here are freshwater mussels that are of the form of these marine mussels. That is, these three organisms: golden mussels, quagga mussels, and zebra mussels, all of which have a narrow at one end of the shell, wider at the other. They don't live fully buried in the sediment, and they attach to surfaces with these protein threads called byssal threads.
Now, a couple things. The number one question I've been asked, I know it's an odd one, are any of these mussels edible?
Sure. They're small, but yeah, you could maybe make a soup out of them or something like that. So have at it.
So they're not poisonous. You can boil one and eat one.
I've never heard of them being poisonous. I've not eaten them myself, so I can't recommend or not recommend them. I will say that the various efforts we hear every now and then of the proposal that we're going to get rid of an invasive organism by eating them, that never seems to work. But can't do any harm. So if you want to eat some mussels, it seems okay to me.
Can you tell me what a golden mussel is? And I'm going to ask the same thing about zebra and quagga, if it's easier for you to group that question together of the differences of them, or if we can go one by one.
Sure, let's talk about the full three. The zebra and quagga mussels are the ones that arrived first in the United States, in North America, and they are closely related mussels. They both came from southeastern Europe, around the Caspian Sea and Black Sea areas. And the zebra mussels spread into Europe after canals were constructed connecting the waterways that flowed into the Black Sea with waterways elsewhere in Europe. And so they spread into Western Europe and Northern Europe and became a pest species there. One of the reasons they were able to spread is that they have these byssal threads, as I said, these protein threads that attach to hard surfaces, and so they could attach to boat hulls, unlike the other types of freshwater bivalves, the ones buried in the sediment that I would refer to as clams, being more of a marine guy. But anyway, they spread into Western Europe, and they also have planktonic larvae. So they, instead of putting out little clams when they give birth, they put out very large numbers of microscopic larvae that float around in the water. And these were carried across the ocean in the ballast water of ships from Europe into the Great Lakes, which is how they got into North America. So both the quagga and zebra mussel arrived in the 1980s. Initially, we didn't tell them apart. We didn't realize there were two different mussels. Eventually, that was figured out. So we don't know exactly when one arrived and when the other arrived, but both in the 1980s. They became extraordinarily abundant in the Great Lakes, first zebras and then quaggas, and they fouled boats and lock systems and docks and all kinds of marine structures. They grew on the bottom of these enormous navigation buoys in such numbers that they sank them below the surface of the water. Just these amazing photographs of the Coast Guard pulling these huge buoys out of the water, and there's just mussel growing on mussel growing on mussel. Incredible weight of them on sorts of things. When they died, their shells got tossed up on beaches, and then you had all these sharp-edged mussels and these stinking, rotting mussel tissue covering the beaches. That was kind of a problem. But the biggest problem for society was that they clogged pipes. They grow inside of pipes where there's water with food in it flowing past them, and they do very well there. And again, they build mussel on top of mussel until they can eventually block pipes. And this happened in both water systems providing drinking water to some towns and also in the cooling water that was being carried into fossil fuel fired and nuclear fired power plants. And it's hard to get them out once they're in the mussels. And so it was a pretty expensive problem as well. And then they affect the ecosystems, of course. Enormous numbers of mussels eating up the food that's in the water column changes what goes on in these ecosystems. There have been impacts on fish, impacts on other mussels, and so on. So that was quagga and zebra mussels. Just to complete the question.
Before we go to gold mussels, because I got questions on this.
Go ahead.
The quagga and zebra mussels, can they grow deeper inside of pipes? Like, do they need sunlight to live?
No, they don't need sunlight. They're animals. They don't photosynthesize. They just need food being brought to them. So they're perfectly happy living in the dark. They may not even know that it's dark, and they do quite well inside of pipelines.
Two more questions on it. So you said it's the larva that got transported over. It's not necessarily the mussels attaching to the ship, it's the larva in the ballast tanks.
That's by far the consensus view. They're just, as freshwater mussels, they'd be unlikely to survive on the outside of a ship coming across from Europe. They couldn't handle the time at sea in salt water, so they couldn't have come that way. We can't entirely rule out some more far-fetched possible mechanisms. I mean, maybe someone brought them over because they thought they were pretty and held them in an aquarium and dumped them into the Great Lakes. That seems very unlikely, but we have no way of absolutely saying that couldn't have happened. At one point, someone suggested that maybe the mussels attached to an anchor, and the anchor was pulled up into the ship, and it traveled over, and then the anchor was let down the Great Lakes. Again, we can't say that couldn't have happened. It's physically possible, biologically possible. It just seems very unlikely. We do know that vast numbers of larvae were carried across the oceans many times in the ballast tanks of ships. And zebra mussels actually showed up a number of times before they became established. So there are some older records of them in ships arriving in the Great Lakes are being found. And so that seems by far the likeliest mechanism that they came across as larvae in ballast tanks.
Yeah, my last question on it is, you said their attachments, like how strong is their attachments to boats or rocks? Like, are they, can they withstand going at 20 miles an hour on the side of a ship, or how difficult is it to pry them off of something?
It can be hard to pull them off. I mean, if you get a single mussel, it's not that hard. I mean, you can pull them off with your hands. You don't have to strain with your greatest strength, but you have to pull pretty hard to get them off. The byssal threads are strong. The mussels are, I mean, they're basically designed to hold mussels in very strong water currents. So I don't know, a speedboat moving at its fastest possible speed, I don't know if they would hold on at that. But most boats at normal speeds, I think the mussels would not have a problem holding on. And of course, there are areas within a boat where they're protected against the current going past. And so, all kinds of organisms can live on ships moving at, 10 knots or whatever through the ocean, if they're in these sort of hidden portions at the stern of the ship or behind some structure or so on. And recreational boats have small areas like that as well.
Thank you. Sorry I had to cut you off. I just had to get those questions out.
Sure, of course.
Next question. What is a golden mussel?
So a golden mussel is not close, is not really related to these zebra and quagga mussels. It's quite distant, still a bivalve, but is far distant from the quagga and zebra mussels in terms of its kinship as it can be. But it's very similar in form, very similar in habit. It's essentially the same type of organism with posing the same types of threats because it attaches to things by these byssal threads and can live in pipes and attach to boats. And it has microscopic larvae that it produces in large numbers and can be moved by ballast tanks. So all those things are essentially the same. One way in which it is different, which is significant for North America, and significant for California, is that it's able to tolerate much lower levels of calcium. Zebra and quagga mussels require pretty high levels of calcium. They do pretty well in Europe, where waters are generally high in calcium. After Europe, the continent with the next highest calcium level is North America. So this is where they showed up. But they're only in the parts of North America that have relatively high calcium levels in their water. There are large portions of the continent in the southeastern U.S. and throughout certain parts of the western U.S. where, and in some places up in the Northeast as well, where zebra mussels and quagga mussels can't live because they require the higher levels of calcium. One place, if you look at a distribution map of quagga and zebra mussels, and there are many of them online, one place where you can see this in the most striking way is in the Adirondack Mountains. The Adirondacks have low calcium levels. They're surrounded by land that has higher calcium levels, and if you go and look on the map, you'll see that there are zebra mussels all around the Adirondacks, but not in the Adirondacks themselves. And it's apparently the calcium that's keeping them out. The same thing is true in California that in terms of, say, the Sierra Nevada, that quagga and zebra mussels have not been able to become established in the Sierra Nevada because of low calcium levels. Also in various waters further north in California, calcium levels are too low. And so they haven't made their way up there yet. But the golden mussel can live in all those areas with low calcium water. And so there's a lot larger portion of California, a much larger portion of North America, which is vulnerable to invasion now that the golden mussel is here.
I think you said Lake Tahoe now is one of the ones that can be extremely vulnerable.
Lake Tahoe. I mean, I know there have been people in Lake Tahoe who've argued for a long time that quagga or zebra mussels could become established there, but the calcium levels are too low and they have not done so. But Limnoperna, the golden mussel, certainly could live there.
Now, where did the golden mussel originate from?
So those are Asian. It's not exactly clear what part of their Asian range is native and what part is invaded. So some people think just south of the Yangtze River in China is their native region. They're present in more northern areas, some of which we know have been invaded. We know that in Japan they're an invader. They're all found all the way up into Korea, where they may also be an invader, and they're found in there are records of them, sparse records, in Southeast Asia, where they may also be an invader. So anyway, they're native to some part of Asia, and at least the China south of the Yangtze River is part of their native range.
And you said they could survive in low calcium waters. Have we seen them survive in higher calcium content waters as well, too?
Yeah, I guess I'd never looked for that question, so I might want to go check it out. Normally speaking, with the quagga and zebra mussels, high calcium is not a problem unless you get into certain terminal reservoirs that don't run out to the sea but are inland reservoirs like Mono Lake in California. Some of those reservoirs have very high calcium levels, but they also have high salinity and odd water chemistries that may be impossible for quagga and zebra mussels to live in. So I don't think high calcium itself is a limiting factor for these mussels. At least we haven't figured out how high.
So the golden mussel can spread a lot more universally than quagga or zebra. It's not as limited?
I believe so. There may be some temperature limitations. I mean, there may be further north. It may be difficult for them. We're not quite sure about that yet. They seem to do pretty well in hotter waters, so they may spread further south. Along the very, very southern edge of the U.S. down in Florida, aside from low calcium, high temperatures might be a problem, or certain shallow waters in the southern United States might be a problem for quagga and zebra mussels, and Limnoperna might have a better shot at it. Limnoperna is the golden mussel, if I say it again. I'll try to stay away from the scientific names. But the golden mussel, I talked about its native range. It's also invaded, again, in the ballast water ships, invaded South America. And it's found in South America. Initially, it was found in Argentina, and then it is spread north well into Brazil. So it's living in some pretty warm waters at this point.
So are new mussels still coming over in ballast water of ships?
They're you mean other species of mussels, not the
Not
golden?
necessarily other species, just are we getting, like, even if we treated golden mussels and zebra and quagga mussels, are we still getting new ones introduced every time a ship comes in?
Well, not every time a ship comes in. So there are rules in place, laws in place now, requiring ships to treat their ballast water, essentially. And this treatment, if properly done, would almost certainly kill off the mussels, quagga mussels, zebra mussels, and golden mussels. But there's very little implementation of this law, very little enforcement of the law, very little monitoring of the law. Essentially no meaningful monitoring, essentially no meaningful enforcement. Out in California, there has been some enforcement over the last I think 3 or 4 years. There's starting to be some limited enforcement of the ballast water laws, but in the rest of the country there appears to be none whatsoever. And so, we have these laws. They're on the books. They're not monitored by the agencies in any meaningful way. They're not implemented or enforced in any meaningful way. And some ships are probably complying and some are not. The fact that we just had golden mussels show up in California shows that they're not being enforced enough to stop the mussels from coming in. So in all likelihood, we're still getting some of each of these mussels coming into different waters in the United States.
Have we seen the golden mussels anywhere else in America?
No, they showed up in the Delta near the port of Stockton. Apparently, that seems to have been their initial starting point, and they've spread from there throughout part of the southern Delta and into the California water supply system. So they got down to O'Neill Forebay, which is a part of the California water supply system, carried in pipes. Water
And
supply.
the treatment for ballast tanks, it can kill all the mussels, so it can kill quagga and zebra, because I imagine that's what it was initially, when it was initially put in place, it kills quagga and zebra. The treatment for ballast tanks can also kill golden mussels as well.
It likely would kill all of them, as I understand them. So there are different types of treatment that are applied. I mean, but the rules apply most stringently, and I think work most effectively for the zooplankton organisms, the larger things in water. There are smaller things in water that the water treatment systems probably do not do much of a job on. There are some serious issues with the ineffectiveness of water treatment for example, for human diseases carried in ballast water, and we may touch on that later. But I think for the what we call the zooplankton, the small microscopic animals living in the water, the treatment systems should do a good job if they're properly operated, and if they're actually running, and if they're running effectively, the systems are maintained and so on. There's a lot of evidence that that's not done. As I said, the golden mussel showing up is clear evidence that it's not done effectively, at least. The lack of enforcement suggests that there are probably ships that aren't treating it at all. And there's a lot of evidence that the treatment systems actually out in the field are not being maintained and operated properly by the ships in many, many cases.
What is the treatment? What are they supposed to be doing?
So a lot of systems do start with filtration. So they filter down to 50 or 40 or 30 microns, which will get rid of most of the zooplankton, including, I think, most of the mussel larvae. And then there's usually some kind of biocide treatments. There's UV is the most common treatment, UV radiation. Next to that is chlorine treatment. And then there are other types of biocides that are used. There's some ozone treatments and other more exotic things. And then there are a few unusual types of treatment that use pressure drop or other types of mechanisms to kill the organisms living in ballast water. Deoxygenation there are a couple of deoxygenation systems and so on. But the vast bulk of them are either UV treatment or chlorine treatment combined with filtration.
And what would enforcement of treating the ballast water look like?
Well, first you'd need to monitor to see if it's being effective. So the agencies would need to go out and collect some, and ideally do surprise visits and collect the ballast water being discharged by a ship and test it across all the parameters that it's supposed to meet. Make sure that it's getting rid of the zooplankton, getting rid of the phytoplankton, getting rid of the indicator organisms for human diseases that are supposed to meet certain standards. The standards themselves are not strong enough to deal with a lot of the things in ballast water. Again, looking especially at the smaller things, bacteria and viruses and smaller fungi and small protozoans. The rules are really bad for them. The rules for phytoplankton are not very good. That is the small floating plants in water, microscopic plant cells. But the rules for the zooplankton are relatively good. So that's where the laws are strongest, both the U.S. laws and the international laws, which have the same standards. So there's some problem with the standards at one end. And then you've got to monitor and make sure that they meet the standards. But of course, you're still not monitoring for all the other things for which the laws aren't set. There are no regulations to requirements to get rid of viruses. There are no limit on the number of small protozoans that can be in the water. And the bacteria standards are these indicator organisms, which basically don't work very well. So for all the small stuff, the rules are really weak. So anyway, you need to monitor. It would be good to have better rules and monitor for those things as well. And when a ship is in violation, you need there needs to be a consequence which is severe enough that ship will get its act in order, and other ships will take notice and also get their act in order. So that's the enforcement end of it. And they're not doing any of that, essentially. They're not checking ballast water when ships come in. The ships are supposed to self-monitor their own ballast water twice a year, once or twice a year, take a sample and measure it only for two things, only for two of the bacterial indicator species. They don't even measure for whether they're killing the zooplankton, whether they're killing off the mussels and so on. That's not even done by anybody. And for the most part, that self-monitoring is for various reasons only being done once a year is a pretty ineffective way of monitoring. And even when the ships are in violation, they haven't been fined. So there isn't the enforcement and fining backup. And so there's really no incentive for the ships to even follow these laws if there's essentially no monitoring and no enforcement going on.
And just a few things to clean up for clarification. The ships we're talking about are big shipping container ships mainly?
Well, there's container ships and other types of cargo ships, but yes, they're cargo ships. They're tankers, they're containers, they're bulkers, they're car carriers. There's a variety of different types of large cargo ships. And we should have maybe started with this. What is ballast water? They take on ballast water because they're carrying cargo, which is heavy stuff that they're carrying across the ocean. And then when they unload that cargo, the boat gets lighter and it rises up in the water, and it can rise up. And when ships are empty, they can rise up so high that the propeller comes out of the water and they can't go anywhere. And certainly they get high enough that they're not sitting at a safe position in the water to cross the ocean and not get knocked over by wind and waves. So after ships empty their cargo, they have to take on something to weight the ship down. And what they take on is water from around them, which we call ballast water. Sinks the ship down to the appropriate level in the water. So the propeller's in the water, the rudder's in the water, the ship's sitting at the right level in the water. And then it goes to some new port where it picks up cargo. It has to dump that ballast water out. It's that is carrying these organisms around the world, mussels and many other things that are of concern.
So can these mussels survive in salt water too, or can they only survive in fresh water?
The ones we're talking about, the golden mussel, quagga mussel, zebra mussel, they're freshwater organisms. They will only survive in fresh water. They may survive in salt water for hours maybe, or some short period of time. There's probably some studies out there on the survival of these organisms in salt water. I don't know off the top of my head, but they're not going to survive a trip across an ocean from Europe to North America or from Asia or South America to North America. They're not going to survive those trips. There are other mussels, as I said, that live in marine waters, and those will live in saltwater ballast perfectly well.
The ships, so they fill up with fresh water at the ports, and then they don't dump their ballast tanks until they offload their cargo then, right? So it's freshwater to freshwater.
Well, some ships go from freshwater ports to freshwater ports. Those are the ones where we're worried about them carrying freshwater organisms. There are other ships that go from saltwater or brackish water ports to salt or brackish water ports. And those we're worried about those carrying marine organisms and estuarine organisms around. And then there are ships that may pick up ballast water in a saltwater port and discharge it into a freshwater port. For the most part, those aren't of concern because they're not carrying things that can survive where they're dumping the water. Now, maybe they run out of the fresh water out into the sea if they survive long enough, so that could conceivably be a concern. But for the most part, it's less. And of course, if you start from a freshwater and then dump your organisms at a saltwater port, that's probably not a problem at all.
It's just the freshwater to freshwater ships that are the biggest problem in this, like when it comes to transporting mussels.
Transporting freshwater mussels, yes. So
freshwater
again, the three mussels we're talking about are freshwater mussels, and there are other freshwater organisms we don't want to have moved around the world that would be a problem for our rivers and lakes. And so there it's the freshwater to freshwater. Now, Europe has a number of freshwater ports in the northern Europe and large rivers of northern Europe. There are river ports there where ocean-going ships come in, can pick up ballast water, carry it across. On the East Coast, our biggest freshwater ports are the Great Lakes, and that's where quagga and zebra mussels showed up. On the West Coast, in Asia, there are some large river systems that have freshwater ports on them, and there are large river systems down in South America that have freshwater ports on them on the Atlantic side the Atlantic side of South America. And so for many of those areas where there are golden mussels could conceivably have come in. And in California, our freshwater ports are Sacramento and Stockton. And it appears that the golden mussel started up near the port of Stockton.
Are there any other freshwater mussels we're worried about coming over?
There are other freshwater mussels, and there are other, as I said, freshwater organisms, which can be a problem for the ecology of freshwaters and for fisheries. in some cases, economic impacts as the mussels have. And so these three are the three best known of the freshwater mussels because they've invaded other parts of the world. So we've seen what they've done in Europe and in South America and in parts of Asia where the golden mussel has also been interested, and we can see the impacts. But there are a number of other freshwater mussels which could potentially be moved around and would probably have similar types of effects. And then there are just all kinds of other organisms, fish parasites, human diseases, fish diseases, things which may alter the ecology that live in fresh waters that can be a problem. There's a New Zealand mud snail that's spread around that may have arrived in ballast water, but then been spread by other mechanisms. And there are other things.
When it comes to the mussels, have we seen the mussels decimate any lake in America or any waterway in the world at all? Have they really changed the ecosystem?
Yeah, well, certainly the ecosystems of the Great Lakes have been changed, and they're some of the largest water bodies in the world. There are areas where the chemistry of the water has been changed because of these mussels. And there are papers about the impacts on other mussels primarily and on fish species in various ways, and they're debated. It changes over time. Some years their impacts are greater and some years worse. But in terms of changing the ecosystem, they have certainly done that in a major way.
Have we seen any major negative effects from them?
Yeah, we've seen some fisheries which people have argued that it can be complicated to say exactly what's going on, but we haven't seen any mussels go extinct. That was a worry initially, and I think there's still reason to be concerned about it. But so far we haven't seen native mussels go extinct, but we've seen their populations decline greatly in areas where the quagga and zebra mussels have come in. That's one fairly apparent effect. And we've seen changes in fisheries in the Great Lakes, which have been attributed to the zebra mussels. There are Great Lakes experts who could speak to this much better than I could about what the actual impacts in the lakes have been.
Do the mussels have any positive effects? Do they bring anything positive to the table at all?
Well, they change ecosystems, and so there are going to be some changes that people will like and some that they don't. They make the water clearer because they filter organisms out of the water. They filter the phytoplankton, which can make the water green and cloudy. And along with it, they'll filter sediment out of the water. And then they don't digest the sediment. They just leave it on the bottom. But they can make the water clearer. And because of that has been appealing to some recreational divers in this country who have taken quagga and zebra mussels and clearly have intentionally spread them to other water bodies. This is strongly discouraged, and they've, in some cases, led to the closure of the water bodies where diving has been cut off for some time or perhaps permanently in some of them because of this. And of course, these become focal points for potential invasion to other waters which are not recreational diving waters where we might want them. So I think that, the places where we know they've been introduced have been like quarry ponds, where the only activity is recreational diving. So the only appearance of zebra mussels in the state of Virginia was in one of these quarry ponds where there was the pond had to be closed. There was an eradication, a project that was done to kill off the mussels. It was successful. It was a small enough pond, and they were able to do that. There are other quarry areas in Pennsylvania and elsewhere around the country where it's clear enough, I think, that we don't have. There's no smoking gun. We don't have photographs of people introducing these mussels into the water, but it's pretty clear from the events that these were intentional introductions by recreational divers in an effort to clear up the water. There are other divers who don't like them because they colonize, for example, wrecks that are underwater, and so massively grow on top of and make it hard. You can't really see the wreck. It's got these mussels just completely covering them. The weight of the mussels can cause damage to them. Where people like to dive on old wooden shipwrecks and stuff like that, they're a threat to that heritage that we have down in the water in some areas. And so the diving community is split on these things.
On those quarry ponds, I guess this is the perfect time to ask this question. So when they were spread, you said it was one pond in Virginia. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, did we see the mussels spread to any other water bodies there?
In Virginia, no.
Because my question is, can birds or any other wildlife spread the mussels? And I feel like that's a perfect experiment, right? If it's just one pond and there's no boaters going in.
Yeah. So theoretically, they can. A mussel could get caught, especially when they're really tiny. They could get caught up in the feathers on the legs. There's some experiments done that involved dunking ducks into a tub that had zebra mussel larvae in it, and then bringing them into a new tub where they weren't and seeing if they carried any mussels over to the new tub. So over very small distances and done very quickly, it's under certain circumstances, it's clear that some mussels could be carried by birds. And so, as I said, it's theoretical. We don't know of any case where it's happened. We do know that mussels were restricted to the southeastern part of Europe for tens of thousands, or at least for thousands of years, without them spreading to the rest of Europe. I think long distance transport is extremely unlikely by those mechanisms. We know as we go back and look at the distribution of organisms, we know that some small freshwater invertebrates have been spread by birds over geologic time scales, because we see that they're in places where they couldn't have gotten by any other means. But it doesn't happen often. Over a human or historic time scale, are we likely to see this happen? Maybe once or twice, but it's just a very, very unlikely mechanism for moving them any kind of distance.
And the other question I had is, how was the water treated
Which
for that
water?
pond in Virginia?
And the quarry pond, yeah.
Yes.
So it turns out, so a number of different things have been tried. General biocides, like copper-based biocides, have been tried and used in some eradications elsewhere. But in Virginia, it's remarkable. We have this remarkable magic bullet in places where you can use it, which is that zebra mussels and quagga mussels are very sensitive to potassium levels, much more so than almost all other freshwater organisms, so that if you can get the potassium levels up and keep them up for weeks to maybe months in some cases, it's temperature dependent and other things. But if you can get them up and keep them up for a good long while, it will kill off the zebra mussels and quagga mussels and pretty much leave everything else okay. Some other bivalves are affected to some degree, but most other organisms seem unaffected. So in the Virginia quarry, they treated this. The treatment was months. They used potash, which is a fertilizer form of potassium, put enormous amounts of it into the water and left it there for a couple of months. And the fish seemed fine. The turtles seemed fine. The macro life that they went down and observed seemed to be unaffected by that treatment. So that's why it's kind of a magic bullet under the right circumstances. But it's a hard thing to do. You need the right circumstances. You need an isolated water body. And with the other biocides, again, there are only certain cases we will be able to eradicate them from relatively small water bodies. But for the most part, once they're established in a water system, they're there, and we're not going to be able to get rid of them.
Two things. One comment. My next episode, I actually have a biocides expert coming on, Dr. Malloy. And the second thing is, do we know, can we kill golden mussels? Can we kill?
Yeah, we don't, I don't know if potassium affects golden mussels in the same way. The general biocides, copper-based biocides and other things probably do. When you talk to Mr. Malloy, that's good. You'll get someone who has a much rosier take on eradicating bivalves, I suspect, from stuff I've seen some of his writings in the past and so on. He has a system he's developed, which is really good for and useful in certain circumstances in terms of getting rid of mussels inside of certain infrastructure and so on. But as far as eradicating mussels from water bodies, we will rarely be able to do it, mostly in smaller water bodies under special circumstances. By all means, we should do it when we can, but it's a very challenging thing to do.
Now that we've laid a great foundation of where these mussels came from and how they got here, how are they being spread today from these water bodies?
Yeah, so they spread within contiguous waters quite easily and readily. And so they will spread downstream because they have these microscopic larvae that will float in the water. And they'll spread anywhere boats can carry them because they'll attach to boat hulls and will happily live on a boat hull that's still in the water and travel any distance that boat goes, and then can potentially reproduce when they get to a new area. Especially if a boat has a number of mussels on it, then they can just live together in a little colony and reproduce together when they get to a new area and release, enormous numbers of larvae out into the water. So in California, our contiguous waters include not just the natural flow of waters, but also the water we move around as part of the water supply system. It's this enormous water supply system. And they're in the delta, the mussels are in the delta. And from the delta, we carry water all the way down into Southern California and throughout a good part of the southwestern portion of California. And so there are waters that are going to be reached through this water system. Also over the mountains from the Central Valley out to the coast in a number of areas. Down south of here in the the mussels will eventually be carried down there. They've made a pretty good start making it to O'Neill Four Bay and somewhat beyond there, and we're likely to see them within a relatively short time, a matter of a year to several years. They're likely to spread throughout these areas, also to wherever boats can carry them up the Sacramento River and so on. And they'll spread down. It's not clear exactly how far downstream they'll live, but it does seem like they are tolerant of salinity. They may not reproduce down in the Sassoon Bay, but they may be able to survive down there, and certainly down to the mouth of the Delta. So that's where we can expect them to go within a few years, let's say, time. Beyond that, they need to be carried overland, and the main mechanism for doing that are boats or equipment that spend time in the water and then are taken to a new water body.
When you say spend time in the water, are you talking 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, or just dropped in the water for an hour?
Well, the authorities try to deal with any boat that's been in the water anywhere. But to my way of thinking, as long as there's not standing water in the boat, as long as you don't have, a live well filled with water with zebra mussel larvae or, golden mussel or quagga mussel or any of these mussel larvae in them, as long as you don't have standing water, then what's going to survive overland transport, in my view, is only likely to be mussels that have settled and grown up to some larger size, a few millimeters, say, in size. Will they be able to withstand the stress of being carried overland out in the air? These are aquatic animals. They're not made to live out in the open air. They can survive it for some time under cooler and humid conditions. Fully adult mussels can live for a couple of weeks even. But for the most part, for very small mussels, they're going to dry out very quickly. If they're in the air, even for a relatively short period of time, they're probably not going to survive. So to my way of thinking, it's a boat that's been in the water, that's been tied up at a marina, that's been there for days or weeks or months, that's accumulated some kind of growth of mussels on them. Houseboats can carry an enormous number of mussels, and we have evidence that they are very good at moving them around. Certain types of construction equipment that might be in waters. Docks are sometimes moved from one water body to another, and they can carry a lot. So anything that's been in the water for a good while and carried from place to place. But to my way of thinking, a boat that's been in the water just for the day, a day boater, is very unlikely to carry these mussels. I mean, again, we can't say there's absolutely no chance without doing careful experiments of that, and the authorities tend to assume that any boat that's been in the water is a threat and needs to be treated out of a sense of caution. But I think we could take a closer look at that, and to the extent that we are doing more onerous efforts, they should probably be focused on boats that have spent some time, that have been at a marina or anchored in a body of water for days at least.
So one of the new things I've seen with regulations that lakes are doing is they're banning trailers. Do you think there's any chance at all these mussels are being transported from different water bodies via trailer?
Yeah, so if the trailer hasn't spent much time in the water, then the only real concern is a mussel that scraped off or dropped off or translocated from the boat hull to the trailer itself while the boat was sitting on it. And that's possible. These mussels can detach and reattach themselves. They have these protein threads. They can drop them and move and go elsewhere. Mussels do this in the water occasionally. Whether a mussel would do this when it's out in the air, I don't know. I don't think anyone's ever tested that possibility. Could a small mussel, get scraped off the bottom of the boat and end up in the carpeting or whatever you've got covering the runners on the boat where it's really hard to see whether there's a mussel there? That seems conceivable. It not a very strong chance of it happening, but it does seem conceivable. So, I'm not exactly sure. I hadn't known about the banning trailers. And so I assume in those water bodies, they've got winches to move the boats in and out of the water, because how do you get them in and out otherwise?
I believe that ban's probably only on recreational boaters. I don't know if industrial equipment follows those same rules.
Yeah, but still a boat. How do you get your boat in and out of the water unless there's a lift to get it in,
So they're only allowing now kayaks, and you have to hand launch your kayak.
Oh, hand launch those things.
Yes.
Because the concern over trailers themselves, you're
Yes.
saying. Yeah. I don't, this is the first I've heard of it, the trailer ban. I've given you my general thoughts on the issue, but I guess before I tell you definitively, I'd like to hear from the people who banned it as to what the thinking is about that. Maybe there's something I'm not thinking about. I want to be a little cautious to go where to
Totally understand.
Too strong an opinion about some a mechanism that I haven't dealt with before.
The couple things I want to hit on is just the boats in general. So, do you think a kayak or inflatable paddleboard or anything, is there a chance those are transporting mussels as well, or is that extremely unlikely?
Again, things that have just been in the water for, less than a day seem unlikely to me to transport mussels effectively. The microscopic organisms, the microscopic larvae, could end up on one of these, sticking to the hull of one of these boats. But again, if there's not actual standing water for them to live in the boat, I think those things would very quickly, they'd dry out and expire very, very quickly. Or maybe if it's 100 feet from one water body to another, 100 yards, and you're carrying it from one to another and get it quickly there. Maybe that could happen. Immediately adjacent water bodies, that's a different story. But, if you're putting it on your car and carrying it somewhere and it's in there in the wind and drying out, I just think boats that have been in the water for less than a day are not much of a risk.
Even if they have like a live well on there?
Well, again, standing water is a problem. So if you've got water in your boat, it's a potential mechanism for moving them. Even there, I would say, the number of villagers in a live well is not of villagers being what we call these bivalve larvae, is not going to be terribly large. Adult mussels who can reproduce and release enormous numbers of young, I think, are going to be a bigger threat than even a live well with some larvae in it. There it's enough of a threat that you can't rule it out. And so the idea of clean, drain, and dry, of really making sure you get rid of that standing water, I think is a pretty straightforward, not particularly onerous mechanism that really should be encouraged.
So, clean, drain, and dry, right? That's the message that all of us are getting. And fortunately, thank you for coming on so we can get more information about what's going on, because I feel like a lot of fishermen and boaters, we don't know what these mussels are. We don't know what the impacts are. All we know is that clean, drain, and dry. But I know a lot of the places now they're offering hot washes for the boats. Is that something you think is effective to stopping the spread of mussels?
Funny you should ask, as if we haven't talked about this before, Mark. So I just want to be clear, clean, drain, and dry, I think will be, in my view, is an effective mechanism for boats that have only been in the water for a day, that don't have standing water and so on. Once they've got an accumulation of mussels on them, especially construction equipment, houseboats, boats with hard to get at places in them, then I think it's a different question, and those things can survive for days or potentially even weeks out of the water as they're transported from one place to another. So we have two things to deal with them, basically. Inspections, to try and carefully look the boat over and look for these things and find them. And, inspections are good in that case. I would say that they're hardly ever going to be perfect, I think. There are places you can look at your boat, you can look at where your boat sits on the trailer, you can see how hard it is to get under there and get at every spot. Depending on the boat, it's going to be hard in some cases. And so we have these hot water washes as well. And in some cases, that's all that's used. The problem is that they don't work. They simply do not work. And so I want to show something to try and explain why that is. We have been doing, hot water washers have been recommended since the early 90s. And agencies and organizations, and the literature is still out there. You can find it in some places, and it's archived. Recommended hot water sprays to clean off boats. But there were two different recommendations. A bunch of agencies and organizations recommended 104-degree water, and a bunch of them recommended 140-degree water. And you can still today, if you go to the websites of different state resource agencies, you will find some of them saying if you wash with 140-degree water, that will kill all the quagga and zebra mussels on your boat. And there are others that say if you wash with 104-degree water, that will kill all the quagga and zebra mussels on your boat. Now, these can't both be the right number. And like I said, they've been in the agency literature of different agencies for, what is that? Well, almost 35 years now. And neither of them, it turns out, are true for hot water washes. How they got into the literature is not entirely clear. As near as I can tell, the 104-degree recommendation came in because of a misreading of a poorly worded Army Corps of Engineers technical memorandum that talked about getting rid of mussels inside of pipe systems. And someone extrapolated that information, misreading this poorly worded statement, to we can just spray boats with them and it'll take care of it as well. And that's how the 104 got into the literature. And then I don't know where the 140 came from, but it may have been a typo for 104. Someone transposed the 0 and 4. Anyway, that's what's been recommended. It was never tested. It was never tested whether sprays could work until 2009. A fellow named Morse down at the University of Texas sprayed some boats and checked to see, or got some mussel samples and sprayed them with hot water at 140 degrees to see what it took to kill them. And what he found was that it took 10 full seconds of 140-degree spray to kill zebra mussels. And other studies that were done found it took 5 full seconds of 140-degree spray to kill quagga mussels. Quagga mussels have a thinner shell, which is probably why they can be killed a little more quickly with spray. And if you think about it even a little bit, you'll realize that spraying a boat so that every part of the boat receives 5 seconds or 10 seconds of spray with the spray that's being used is just unworkable. Let me show you what the training manuals say you should do, and we'll see what we think about that. Okay, so this is an 8-second excerpt from a training video, for a half-hour long training video that the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission put together with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And the narrator is going to tell you accurately what these scientific studies said, starting with a study in 2009, which is that you need 5 seconds or 10 seconds of 140-degree water contacting the mussels in order to kill them. But watch not only what he says, but what he does.
140-degree treatment for at least 5 to 10 seconds.
Okay, that's what he says. Now, is he holding that in place for 5 to 10 seconds? I'm going to pull up another screen here to break that down. Okay, so here's a still from that training video. You can see the spray. It's a flat fan-shaped spray that comes out of what's called the spray wand. And when the wand is held close to the boat as it's supposed to be, in these 2009 study, they sprayed from about 6 inches away. You get this fan-shaped spray that's about 1 inch or 2 inches wide and maybe 6 or 12 inches high. And so this is being moved over the boat surface. And in this video, he moves across about 4 feet of this boat surface, of 2 feet of this boat surface in 4 seconds, or about 6 inches every second. And that means that if the spray is 1 inch wide, then each section of the hull is getting sprayed for about 1/6 of a second. And if the spray is a full 2 inches wide, then it's getting sprayed for about 1/3 of a second. And remember, what the science says is that they need 10 full seconds in order to kill off zebra mussels. 10 seconds is 30 times slower than 30 to 60 times slower, depending on how wide the spray is, than the spray shown in these videos, and the rate of spray that is done. So if a boat takes, say, 20 minutes to spray, when you spray it as shown in these training videos and as people actually spray them out there, then in order to slow it down to the point where you get 10 seconds of spray on every part of the hull, you'd need 10 hours. You'd need to take 10 hours to spray that one boat. And so no one has ever done that. No one's ever going to do that. It's just totally unworkable. And so this is how it works. You know, the training videos say, and the literature that the agencies put out and the organizations put out all quote the scientific studies, and they say you need 5 to 10 seconds of spray. But then we have these hot water wash stations where every part of the boat is getting less than a second of spray, a fraction of a second of spray, and that's it. And that's what they show in the training videos. That's how they teach people to do this. That's how it's done out in the real world. What does less than a second of spray do? Well, as the 2009 study found, 1 second, 1 full second of 140-degree water does nothing. 100% survival of mussels, 0 mortality from 1 second of spray. And so that's what we're doing with these hot water washes. We're not killing any mussels. Water temperature just, you just can't spray them slowly enough and thoroughly enough to kill the mussels using that mechanism.
Is that water pressure enough to detach them from the boat?
Well, in some cases, if they're really loosely attached, it might be. But again, as these training videos say, those spray wands are made to step down the pressure in the water so that you don't damage the boat. The one thing these the contractors doing the washing don't want to do is have to face a bunch of people suing them for damage to their boats. And so the pressure is generally stepped down. Maybe they use higher pressure water to clean construction equipment. I mean, there may be some people somewhere using high pressure sprays. But again, according to these training videos, high pressure sprays can damage delicate parts of boats. So,
And
yeah,
just to elaborate on that, you can't pressure wash the inside of a ballast tank. And when they did my live well, they just pumped the water through it. So there's no pressure anyway
yeah. I
in
think that's
those
generally
areas of the
true. I
boat.
mean, the high pressure becomes an issue. It's a challenge to do and an issue for damage and so on. And it's just hard to figure a way to use it across the vast diversity of recreational boats that are coming through and do it safely. But anyway, that's not what's being done. That's not what's being told to people. What they're told is if you spray them with 140-degree water at these low pressure, it will kill all of the mussels. And then if you're doing that, how thorough an inspection do you do on that boat? Probably not as thorough because you know that the hot water wash is going to kill them all, which turns out not to be true. And so we'd really be better off to dispense with the hot water spraying of boats. There may be ways in which hot water can be used. So if you have an anchor that's been used in another water body, you could stick it in a bucket or a bin and fill it with 140-degree water, or even 120-degree water, or maybe even 104-degree water, and leave it there for a few minutes, not a second, not 10 seconds, but a few minutes while you're inspecting the boat. That would probably kill off the mussels. And so we could come up with ways to use hot water effectively for certain things. There may be parts of the boat where it's really hard to inspect inside the gimbals or so on, or around the motor mounts or something like that, where maybe holding that spray on each spot for 10 seconds is feasible. And that would be an effective way of trying to get into places where you really can't see effectively if there are mussels in there and really can't clean them off. But it's a very more nuanced type of use of hot water than what we're doing now, which is to just spray down the boat and saying that kills all the mussels.
Are they only using hot water, or are they using some type of soap or something with it for the mussels as
I
well?
think it's just, as far as I know, it's just hot water. There's no chemical treatment that they're using. Do they ever put soap in with the hot water? I don't know, but I think that's not what's done. I think it's just hot water.
Is there any methods that are effective that we're doing right now, or that maybe some niche areas doing?
Well, quarantine is effective if you hold the boat out long enough to kill everything. And of course, that's an incredible nuisance for a boat owner. But having it out of the water, and sometimes, it's just if you're not out there every day fishing or every weekend fishing, you may be able to, and you've been in water that has quagga or zebra mussels or golden mussels, you may be able to leave your boat out of water for a couple weeks or a month. Depends on how cold and wet it's been in the interim as to how long it needs to be. There are charts that can help you figure that out. So it's not impossible. In cases where the authorities really need to make sure, they could quarantine boats. It's, like I said, for the boat owner, this is not a happy way of doing it, but it is a way. We don't really have effective chemical treatments that, have been broadly authorized for use on boats. That 2009 paper, which could have been a little blunter if you read it carefully, the scientific paper, I think what he's telling you is washing boats doesn't work, but he doesn't come out right up front and say that. He says, if you wash boats, you need to have every part of the boat have 10 full seconds of spray, and leaves it to people to figure out what that means, that it won't work. But he does recommend two alternatives. One is quarantine, and the other is a boat dunk tank, basically, that you could create tanks where you run the boat into it, where the water's up at 140 degrees, and you can keep the boat in there for a full 10 seconds. And all parts of the boat that are exposed to the water, the mussels would be killed. And I read recently that someone had built one of these and was using them somewhere, but I don't remember the details on it. So maybe they're going to come somewhere, but that seems like a really hard thing to do as well. And then, of course, you've got the interior of the boat where water has been and so on that you need to pay some attention to as well. Again, clean, drain, dry can help a lot with that part of the boat. So there are things we can do. There's nothing that's easy, that's fully, that's guaranteed to work. And so we do things which help. We're careful boat owners, and we clean, drain, dry our boats. We do careful inspections when they're being pulled out of waters that have quagga or zebra mussels, or going into waters that don't. Hot water wash as a whole won't work, but there are some ways in which we can use hot water to decontaminate our anchors or other things that we can put into a bucket or a bin. So some combination of those things, I think, is what we should, and the authorities should really be getting behind. And that's what I would generally recommend for people to watch out.
A couple of things. This 2009 study, is that what pretty much everyone's basing the hot washes off of?
Well, there were also I know there was one, I believe, 2 studies done of quagga mussels as well. And as I said, they generally found that about 5 seconds would kill the quagga mussels. So there are 3 scientific studies that I know of that have reported on this. There may be a couple of others that have looked at it as well, but that's it basically. So one of the cautions about that is, of course, whenever they do these, they're doing them on a certain population of mussels that they've taken out of a certain water body. And so there may be some variation. Some mussels have thicker shells in some waters than they do in other waters. So when they say 10 seconds, maybe 12 seconds would be safer, or 15 seconds would be safer. But that's the ballpark of what's needed.
And we haven't tested this on golden mussels yet.
As far as I know, there have been no studies done on golden mussels. They seem pretty similar in their shell size and so on, but again, I haven't measured the thickness of those shells. I don't know that anyone has done it and compared it. That would be a starting place. But these studies should be done, I suppose, if hot water washers are going to be used. But what they're going to tell us is probably something similar to what we've been told for quagga and zebra mussels, that it will take an exposure of some number of seconds, which is very hard to do when you're washing a boat. Currently, as we've seen, most of the boat gets washed with some fraction, usually some small fraction of a second. And so if you're going to go up to several seconds, it's going to be, many times slower a process. But that's probably not going to be practical.
Couple of closing things. Is there anything you want to tell the community, or what changes need to be made to stop the spread of mussels? Is there any message you want to tell everybody?
Well, I think we have this handful of tools in hand of clean, dry, and inspect your boats, and quarantining when possible, and so on, which will help to slow the overland spread of mussels. The good news is they don't spread very quickly overland. On the east, when they spread, it was mostly like 5 or 10 miles, and it was like 3 years before they spread out of the Great Lakes into some other water body. And so it doesn't happen often. Most times, there aren't mussels on a boat. Most times, if there are mussels on a boat, they don't make it because they're not made to live out in the open air. But sometimes they do. We know they did to get out to California. Both quagga and zebra mussels made very long journeys out to Lake Mead and out to a reservoir in California for the zebra mussels. And so it is possible they've shown up north in the Snake River. That's another overland transport. So it can happen. And so we're starting with a mussel for which it's a difficult task, and we're trying to make it that much more difficult that they won't survive. And so we should really try to do the things that are pretty straightforward, and occasionally do the things like quarantining that are more difficult when we have good reason for doing it. But the other thing I think to be concerned about, and that's my main concern, is that the potential for ballast water especially, but other mechanisms as well, to bring in yet new organisms that can invade our rivers and lakes. There are other things that can be even worse than quagga and zebra and golden mussels. Some of these are human disease organisms, which ballast water can and has in some cases spread around the world. Ballast water brought a newly evolved strain of cholera to South America, where it ended up making 1 million people sick and killing 10,000 people. There are a wide variety of pathogenic bacteria that are found in ballast water. Many of these are wound-infecting bacteria, and there's a lot of antibiotic resistance in bacteria. So if you ever wade in the water and ever have a recent cut on your feet or ankles, or your hands go in the water and you've got cuts from hooks on your hands, you do not want antibiotic-resistant foreign novel bacteria in the water, and that's what we're bringing in ships every day. And the treatment mechanisms for these are not nearly as effective as they appear to be for the zooplankton, for the animals in the water. And as we discussed earlier, the implementation and the monitoring and enforcement are virtually non-existent. And so both as someone who works in the water, as people who recreate in the water, as people who drink water, we really ought to be concerned about this stuff coming in and do a much better job of it. The fact that the golden mussel just arrived last year in California, we knew about this mussel, we knew it was a problem, we knew it could be brought in ballast water, and we have these laws in place, but they're not good enough in many ways, and they're clearly not being monitored and enforced in the way they need to be in order to protect the waters against invasions. And we should get to work on it before worse things happen.
Got it. So definitely there's worse things to come if we don't make some changes. And the last thing I want to close with, if people want to get in touch with you or your work or see what it is that you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I'm sure you can find me online if you Google me. We have a website called the Exotics Guide, which shows a number of the exotic marine species that have shown up on the Pacific coast. And there's plenty of papers out there to dig me up on as well. So whether you look online or look in the scientific literature, I can be found. And I'm happy to answer questions if people have them. So
Is the best way to reach you via email?
yeah, I usually respond to email pretty well.
Dr. Cohen, thank you.
Of course, Mark.
That wraps up this special surprise episode of Angler's Insight. This was actually meant to be our very first episode, but due to some audio issues, we had to run it back. And honestly, I'm glad we did. It was super important for me to have Dr. Andrew Cohen on just to explain how the mussels got here, how they're spreading, and everything else about them. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you're listening on YouTube and have any questions, comments, concerns, confessions, or suggestions for topics or speakers that you would like to see on the channel, please drop them in the comments section below. While this podcast has kicked off with invasive mussels, it won't stop there. I plan to finish the series on invasive mussels. I have a few more people coming on that I really want to talk to try to just really give a good overview of invasive mussels, what they are, how they got here, what we're doing, and what we can do. However, I plan to cover a wide range of topics that impact our waterways. I think the next series might focus on salmon fishing and population decline, but I'm open to anything. I've already had a few requests for outdoor topics that aren't strictly fishing related, and if enough people are interested, I'll definitely branch out. We will still have the episode coming with Dr. Malloy soon. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you the next time. English Insight.